Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll start with this. Another look at the ongoing Imane Khelif situation, what led to the fighter's ban from boxing, and how woke campaigners ignored warning signs to allow the fighter to compete at the Olympic Games. This comes to us by way of Imane Kremlev and the IBA's angle of it. Imane Khelif stood atop the Olympic podium in Paris last year, draped in the Algerian flag, and crowned champion of the women's 63-kilogram boxing division. That's welter. But according to the man who runs the International Boxing Association, the fighter should have never even been there.
And I agree with him. It's just more woke, leftist bullshit behind the guise of a DSD.
In an exclusive interview with Mail Sport, IBA President Imane Kremlev has called on the International Olympic Committee to strip Khelif of the fighter's gold medal and apologize to the other athletes after revealing behind-the-scenes details of conclusive and repeated testing that found the fighter does not meet the eligibility criteria to compete in the female category because the athlete...
That's not a female.
Not based on karyotype. He went on to add that former IOC President Thomas Bach should be held personally responsible for the controversy, describing him as a rat who's put politics on the podium instead of athletes.
Because, like I said, this is just more woke, leftist bullshit behind the guise of a DSD.
Kremlev also praised President Donald Trump for enshrining into law the principle that women's sport is for biological women, insisted that the IBA's form of gender testing must take place before competition, and dismissed the idea of a third category in sport altogether.
A third category. Who's supposed to be in it? Unicorns?
His criticisms come as tensions between the IBA and the IOC reach a boiling point, not just over Khelif's case, but over what Kremlev sees as a broader failure of governance and fairness at the heart of the Olympic movement, speaking with open hostility towards the IOC's leadership. He accused the organization of abandoning sporting integrity in favor of political convenience.
You didn't want to take a hardline stance. You pussied out and created this controversy.
There is a lot of corruption surrounding the IOC and many violations of good sporting principles, Kremlev told Mail Sport. The IOC is not fighting for the fairness in sport. The IOC is giving away medals based on their political interests. Imane Khelif should be made to return the Olympic medal from Paris. Kremlev's remarks come amid renewed controversy over gender regulations in elite sport and the widening chasm between the IOC and IBA in defining what makes an athlete eligible to compete in women's divisions.
Oddly enough, this doesn't seem to affect the men's categories. Gee, I wonder why.
At the center of it all is Imane Khelif, the 25-year-old Algerian fighter who was disqualified from IBA-sanctioned events after 2 rounds of testing, first in 2022, then again in 2023, found the athlete reportedly possessed XY chromosomes, a male karyotype. Yet less than a year later, the athlete was allowed to compete at the 2024 Games in Paris, where he won a gold medal under IOC eligibility rules, which prioritize legal documentation such as passport, sex designation, over biological testing. Kremlev revealed the exact events leading up to their discovery of Khelif's failed gender tests. The first round of tests came after coaches at the 2022 IBA Women's World Championships in Istanbul raised concerns. Blood samples were collected from a group of athletes, including Khelif, and analyzed by System Tip Laboratory in Turkey.
It's Imane.
The first test was carried out during the 2022 World Championships after we noticed some suspicious moments. We decided to test a group of athletes, not just one or two. Two of the results came back, let's say, abnormal. It was the first time we had encountered a situation like this, so we felt it was necessary to conduct a second round of testing to be absolutely sure before making such a serious decision. That follow-up test conducted before Khelif's scheduled appearance at the 2023 IBA World Championships in New Delhi involved another round of blood analysis, this time by Dr. Lal Path Labs in India.
It's Imane.
The result, Kremlev said, was identical. The second test was done in 2023 and confirmed the same findings as the first. Both tests showed XY chromosomes. That does not meet the eligibility requirement for female boxing. After that, the athletes were disqualified. And of course, we informed the IOC about the situation.
As if you needed a chromosomal test to see that Imane Khelif is a man, and Lin Yuting. It's plain as day.
Both of those athletes were informed of the findings and given 21 days to appeal the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Neither athlete appealed. Both were disqualified. But only months later, Khelif returned to the ring, this time at the Paris Olympics, where he entered under IOC rules and secured the ultimate prize. To Kremlev, this was a betrayal of the sport and the athletes. He told Mail Sport, Thomas Bach has always put politics to the podium, not the athletes who should be there in fact. And that's why a lot of sponsors have refused working with the IOC further, because they are violating sports principles.
Go woke, go broke.
How you yourself want to dress and how you yourself want to live is your own business, but the rest of the world doesn't have to be a party to your delusion, to your fantasy.
Go woke, go broke.
Thomas Bach is now leaving his position and running away like a rat. He should kneel and apologize to all the female boxers who became victims of this situation regarding gender eligibility, and he should financially compensate every athlete who suffered. And of course, the Olympic medals should be returned.
Leftists are cowards.
The IBA president accused the IOC of politicizing sport and dodging accountability, claiming the organization has deflected criticism by blaming Russia for sowing disinformation. Why is he putting everything on Russia's shoulders? Why doesn't he comment on the situation between Israel and Iran, or between Israel and Gaza? Mail Sport has contacted the IOC and Thomas Bach for comment. The IOC, for its part, has not publicly recognized the validity of the IBA tests. Instead, IOC spokesman Mark Adams previously said those tests are not legitimate tests. The tests themselves, the process of the tests, the ad hoc nature of the tests are not legitimate. The testing, the method of testing, the idea of the testing, which happened kind of overnight, none of it is legitimate, and this does not deserve any response.
Well, guess what? World Boxing, who you recognize to oversee all the amateur boxing, they're doing tests of their own, and Imane Khelif and Lin Yuting have yet to be tested. But if they are tested and it reveals a male karyotype, that in effect vindicates Umar Kremlev and the IBA's findings.
Instead, the IOC continues to follow its own transgender and intersex athlete guidelines, which require testosterone suppression for trans women and legal documentation confirming sex for classification.
In other words, you want biological men competing against biological women.
Khelif, who's not recently challenged the test results and has remained silent on their findings aside from a cryptic social media post, competed under her Algerian passport, which lists her sex as female.
Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England.
Still, Kremlev remains defiant. He also expressed support for recent legislation in the United States that bans transgender women from competing in female categories, praising President Donald Trump for signing the order.
As you know, Donald Trump signed an order stating that women's sport is for women and men's sport is for men. I'm absolutely confident that no one will be able to bypass this at the Olympic Games now, because the rules have become very strict, as they should be.
Am I all of a sudden a doctor because I throw on scrubs and a stethoscope?
Because I identify as a doctor.
Am I going to get a doctor's salary on that predication? Because that seems to be the predication that these men want to compete among women.
Woke, leftist, bullshit.
Everyone is copying us. They're conducting gender tests and are now being forced to do so, what we were calling for all along. The rest of the world is finally doing. They can't avoid it anymore because the order has been signed. It's now law in the United States. What emerges from Kremlev's position is a fierce call for a single science-based standard across all sports, not fragmented rules based on political alliances or paperwork. There should be one rule that everyone follows. Gender testing before every event. That's the only way to make sure the fight is fair, he said.
He's damn right.
The issue remains deeply contentious. Advocates for transgender and intersex athletes argue that such testing regimes are invasive, discriminatory, and out of step with modern human rights law.
Oh, spare me. The whole concept of categories for men and women is intended to be discriminatory, to separate the men from the women. You just want to blur that line.
Which then begs the question, if we're not going to separate them, then why have categories at all?
For Kremlev and others, it is about preserving the core values of boxing: equality, fairness, safety, and trust in the outcome.
Everyone talks about inclusion, he said, but in the ring there are rules. And rules are there to protect. Without them, we don't have a sport, we just have chaos.
We got a lot of sick people trying to force everybody to be a party to their fantasy. Woke, leftist bullshit. And it's time for that to stop.
It's time for the adults in the room to take control, because a boxing ring is no place for cosplay, no place for land of make-believe. Identify as whatever you want somewhere else.
Get the hell out of here!
Men's super middleweight news, Terrence Crawford reveals why he chose no tune-up fight for Canelo. Terrence Crawford has explained his reasoning for going straight to the super middleweight division to face Canelo Alvarez rather than taking a warm-up fight at his new weight class. The 37-year-old aims to become a triple undisputed world champion when he takes on the Mexican for all 4 alphabet titles on September 13th at the Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. After a 41-fight career spanning 17 years, Crawford has won multiple titles, including undisputed at super lightweight and welterweight. 10 months ago, he moved up from welterweight to super welter to dethrone WBA champion Israel Madrimov. Now, he moves up another 14 pounds to super middle. Crawford revealed why he did not take an in-between bout at super middle or one division below at middle. If you look at my career, I always went straight to the champion. Every weight class I went up to, except 140, I had to fight for a vacant title, but I always went for the champion, Crawford told Mail Sport. I think whether I fight a non-champion or a champion, it's going to be the same thing. The press tour for the September super fight is well and truly underway. And in New York, the fighters came face-to-face once again after their initial presser in Riyadh. This time fight promoter Dana White had to intervene after Canelo pushed Crawford back, prompting Bud to march towards him before security intervened. It may have been an excuse for the champion to use his strength, an advantage he would appear to have, but IQ and ringcraft also comes into it, as the American explained.
I don't think Bud is telling the whole story. Why didn't he take a tune-up fight in between, at either middle or super middle? Because the inactivity...
What's the virtue of having sat out for over a year the night of the fight? How does that help your situation? What does that do?
Nothing.
So why not take a fight in between? I think it's because whether you're talking about an in-between fight at middle or at super middle, given that Terrence doesn't have a middleweight's frame or a super middleweight's frame, it could prove to be a lot more arduous than necessary ahead of the Canelo Alvarez fight. Canelo himself doesn't have a super middleweight's frame. He's a small guy. He's a small fry. Even though he's acclimated to that division.
He doesn't tower over Terrence Crawford. They're basically eye-level to each other. Whereas if Terrence had to fight a middleweight or a super middleweight, that could prove to be physically taxing. Don't kid yourself. That fight with Israel Madrimov at 154, that wasn't a walk in the park.
There's a reason that fight ended Terrence Crawford's knockout streak. Going into it, Terrence had knocked out the last 11 guys consecutively he had fought, but upon ascending to the junior middleweight division, he could not knock out Israel Madrimov.
It's not saying that knockouts are everything, but that is saying that a guy like Terence, his size, at his age...
You'd be rolling a dice taking on a bona fide middleweight. You'd be rolling the dice taking on a bona fide super middleweight.
Where you're already rolling a dice taking on Canelo. Fighting somebody else in between jeopardizes the Canelo fight, which is why I think he didn't take a fight in between.
If Canelo couldn't knock out Charlo, or you really think that he's going to knock out Crawford? I would pick Terence Crawford to beat a Canelo Alvarez, even at 168. Everybody can call me crazy and whatever you want to say. I get it. Y'all didn't believe me when I told you about Spence, but trust me, Crawford will figure out a way. I know a secret y'all don't know, and I ain't going to tell you why I would pick Terence Crawford, but it's part of the secret is the reason why I'm picking him to win the fight. So
that's Timothy Bradley's rationale, that if Canelo Alvarez couldn't knock out Jermell Charlo, how's he going to knock out Terence? I could ask that same question in reverse, you know. If Terence Crawford couldn't knock out Israel Madrimov, how's he going to knock out Canelo?
Then you're going to say, well, there's more than one way to win. Terence doesn't have to knock Canelo out to win the fight.
And then I'll say, well, Canelo doesn't have to knock out Terence to win the fight.
The rationale is far too subjective and linear, accommodating to one fighter but not the other, where I'm just calling it down the middle and calling a spade a spade. If Terence didn't take a in-between fight, in between the Madrimov fight and the Canelo fight, it's because size matters.
Now, I don't expect Terence Crawford to say that, or Brian Bomac McIntyre to say that, or Timothy Bradley, but it's the truth. If you roll the dice with a middleweight, it may be more difficult than you need it to be. If you do the same thing at super middle, it'll be the same thing. Whereas Canelo presents a unique challenge. Here you have a fighter who, while he is acclimated to the super middleweight division, he doesn't have a super middleweight's frame. He is a fighter who moved up there like you're a fighter who's moving up there.
So in your mind, that makes him beatable. It's a challenge, not saying that it isn't, but it's a unique challenge.
None of this means that Terence Crawford would get splattered at middleweight or splattered at super middle, so much as, to Terence, it may be more trouble than it's worth taking on a bona fide middleweight or a bona fide super middleweight, so instead of that, he'll just go balls deep into the Canelo fight. He'll go for it straight away.
May have spent the last calendar year putting on significant size and muscle to prepare himself for that fight. That may be where the bulk of his efforts have gone into. Instead of a tune-up fight,
putting on functional muscle, doing his best to acclimate to carrying that much muscle into a fight because he's never had to before. And that's why I think he didn't take a tune-up fight in between. It's too risky.
I don't expect him to say that, but that's what I think it is.
Everybody's so focused on how Canelo looked in the Williams Skull fight, it's taken their focus off of how Terence looked in the Madrimov fight. Neither guy looked spectacular in their last outing.
Neither guy scored a knockout.
What applies to Canelo Alvarez applies just as much to Terence Crawford. I don't have all the answers, but that's what makes it a fascinating fight. Maybe Terence wins, maybe not.
But there are people out there that are convinced that he has the answers. There are some others that feel Canelo's too big, too strong.
This is too much for Terence Crawford under these circumstances, and he's gonna get knocked out. I can't blame either group for what they think.